Joining us now, Tom Garrett. Tom is the United States Congressman from the 5th District of Virginia. That's the General Lynchburg area and points in between. He replaced Robert Hurt, who retired. And Tom, up there, he's a mover and a shaker. Congressman Garrett, good to have you on, sir.
John Fredericks, how are you?
Never better. Let's get to some of the things happening right now. Let's start with these protests, many of them paid. I think it's a good thing they're paid because they were unemployed or they were living in their mom's basement or whatever. Now they have jobs. They can participate in the economy. And so here's a good thing for President Trump. He said he would create jobs. And so he is through protesters. I mean, if they're legal, what's the problem?
Well, I don't know. I like the protesters. I mean, we spent a year and heard nothing but please repeal Obamacare. And now that they've got protests going on, I understand that there's actually a minority opinion that's opposed to that. So that's good. I appreciate hearing from them and welcome them to the discourse.
That's kind of what I think, and we've had a lot of people upset over it. But look, I think they have a right to protest, and let's get them in. We look forward to you having a town hall meeting, and people say they're going to overwhelm your meeting and come and raise hell, but I think you can stand up to them.
Well, I'm not that worried about that. I mean, what we really ought to do is take advantage of the wonderful technology that we have, and you know, we could do teletown halls or Facebook Live and have 10, 15, 20,000 people on, and I think that's what these protesters want. They want to have the widest swath of voices heard. I think they really appreciate that there are some people who don't share their opinions, and they want those folks to be heard too. I mean, I guess there was a speaker on campus, at Stanford last night?
No, it was at University of Cal, Berkeley.
Yeah, Berkeley, and the protesters really welcomed them and said, you know, we want to hear dissenting points of view and what do you have to say? And that sort of open-minded discourse is what makes America better.
They do have an open mind. There's no question about it. They are definitely encouraging all sides of the debate, Congressman Garrett, no question. Let's get to Obamacare, repeal, replace. We still don't have a replacement. What's going on?
Look, people act as if the world didn't exist before Obamacare. And then you hear the sort of jingoistic talking points of you don't have a plan, which is exactly how they say it. If you'd like to hear that again, it's you don't have a plan. The fact of the matter is we have a multitude of plans. What we're not going to do is pass the bill so that we can find out what's in it. That's been tried before. It didn't work very well. So there's an intelligent discourse going on amongst the varying parties, and we're going to try to find things that actually work. You know, I think it's funny the Affordable Care Act is called the Affordable Care Act. Number one, it's not affordable, and number two, it's a coverage act. It's not a care act. As premiums and deductibles skyrocket, then you have a piece of paper that says you'll get care, but if you can't afford to pay your deductible, you got coverage but no care, and then we fall back onto the indigent care system. And once again, the left is much more concerned with the optics, with saying, look, we care, than actually addressing the problem. And so, you know, we're going to do this deliberately because, as history would indicate, we might not get but one shot at it.
I think you're right. You're only going to have one shot, so you have to do it the right way, right? No question. So we look forward to these plans coming out. Let's get to President Trump's nominee for the Supreme Court 2 days ago. What did you think of the way they rolled that out, Congressman?
Well, you look, the messaging on the executive order dealing with terrorist threats to the nation was poor. The rebound with the Gorsuch rollout was, I think, exceptional. You can say what you want about President Trump, the people with whom he's chosen to surround himself. They're not dumb. They're learning. I thought the rollout was handled very well. I candidly think that the left should take Gorsuch and smile walking away. They're not smart enough to do that. Here's a guy who clerked for Byron Whizzer White, who was no conservative, who clerked for Anthony Kennedy, who's been the court's swing vote. I'm not convinced. In fact, I do not believe that Gorsuch is necessarily a doctrinal conservative. I do know to a metaphysical certainty that he's more than qualified to serve on the court. And if they want to block the Gorsuch nomination, I got a feeling that who replaces Gorsuch will be somebody maybe more to my liking. So if they're smart, they'll understand that Mr. Trump, I think, has extended an olive branch. I don't anticipate that they'll be smart.
Well, they certainly don't have a history of that. And you've got a faction of the Democrats right now that believe their best strategy is to just oppose everything, regardless of what it is that President Trump does. My opinion is I think that gets old after a while. People see through that. And so instead of taking a targeted approach, they're just taking a blanket approach. Whatever the president does, they're going to say, no, we don't want that, and fire their protesters up. I just don't see how this is sustainable over time. I mean, you can do this for a couple, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, but over time, I mean, it just wears itself out.
Well, unfortunately, I think it's like the little boy who cried wolf. I mean, right. The mischaracterization of the executive order on immigration was so bad that at the end of it, the Democrats were either willfully ignorant or lying about what the order did. And then you hear, and we're going to speak about this on the floor here in about an hour and a half, that this quote-unquote Muslim ban is bad for America's image abroad and that it's used as an ISIS recruitment tool. Well, okay, if that's the case, then why do you all perpetrate sort of the myth, the lie, if you will, of a Muslim ban? It affects 11% of Muslims on the planet Earth. It does not affect a ban on but about 0.9%, and that lasts about half as long as President Obama's quote-unquote ban was against Iraqi citizens. So it's they've chosen destructive rhetoric that, in their words, endangers the safety of U.S. citizens at home and abroad over telling the truth so that they can score political points. And the American voters are going to see this at some point. And I think, maybe they'll have a great success in polarizing some small fraction of the populace. The rest of America is looking for people who are looking for solutions. They're not in any way, shape, or form solution-oriented.
We're with Republican Congressman Tom Garrett, 5th District, Virginia. Congressman, you're a lawyer. Does President Trump's administration have the right, legally, within the framework that we have, to protect the borders of the United States and to implement this ban?
No, they don't have the right. They have the duty. They don't have the right, they have the duty. It is within the charge in Article 2 of the executive branch to do exactly as President Trump has done. It's not do they have the right, it's whether or not they'll fulfill their duty, right? I met with the King of Jordan yesterday in a small group, and he said it's good after 8 years of a vacuum in leadership to see decisive leadership from the United States. And he was asked specifically about the executive order on immigration and commented that every nation had a duty to its citizens to protect its borders from those who would do them harm. That's the King of Jordan, right? I mean, he doesn't have a right to do it. He has an obligation to do it. And again, the opposition party, so that's how they style themselves, will either help protect Americans or help undermine the protection of Americans. And when you peddle a false narrative about a Muslim ban, which is a lie, then you undermine the safety of Americans by enraging and inflaming world sentiment, by creating a recruiting tool for our enemies, and by perpetrating a myth that simply isn't true. But the president doesn't have the right to do what he's done. He has a duty and obligation to do what he's done, and I commend him for doing it.
All right, so you met yesterday with the King of Jordan, who basically, as you're relaying here on our show, was supportive of the Trump administration ban, again, of these 7 countries. And what they said is the same thing that President Obama said about these 7 nations, that they have a history of harboring and exporting terrorists. Why wasn't that reported anywhere in the media?
I don't know. I mean, it wasn't a secret meeting. It was in the Foreign Affairs Committee room. There were 45 people there. I still don't like. I mean, you used the word ban. That's absolutely not true. And what we discussed is it's not that the nations are a problem. It's that the apparatuses that should exist within a friendly nation don't exist. In other words, if John Fredericks sought to migrate from Hampton Roads to the nation of Virginia 5, and Virginia 5 and Hampton Roads were in good diplomatic relations, we could call Hampton Roads and say, does Fredericks have a history of extremism? Does he cavort with terrorists? Do you have him on your radar as a threat to life and well-being of your citizens? There's nobody to call in Yemen. There's nobody to call in Syria. There's nobody to call in Iraq, Iran, Sudan. So This is just simply a recognition of the fact that we live in the world we live in, not the world we wish we lived in.
So basically what you're saying, this is because there's no legitimate vetting process that we can have because there's no paper trail. Half of these countries that are on the 90 or 120-day immigration pause, if you will, they don't even have governments in place in order to be able to provide you with information.
And where they do, Iran, they have governments in place that might be motivated to provide false information.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
It's pretty simple. Again, I mean, you've got what happened with this executive order was it was issued and the left didn't read it and proceeded into freak-out mode.
Right.
Now that we've read it, we understand not only is it precedented, it's precedented by President Obama, and that the right, with America's best interest in mind, didn't raise the hullabaloo that the left has, I suppose because we prioritize America's best interest on the right over scoring political points. Sad that you can't say that the other way.
Exactly. And also, is it not exactly what President Trump said he was going to do for 2 years on the campaign trail? He said, number one, he would institute extreme vetting. And he said the second thing he wouldn't do was telegraph his hand. So that's why the order came down without them giving 7 days or 8 days or 15 days or 1 month, because he said, look, had we done that, they would have rushed in all the bad guys when whatever time frame that is.
Well,
right?
To the extent that they were able to do it, I do wish that there'd been a day of notice given, because most of what we learned about the legalities and the technicalities of the executive order, we didn't learn until after it had been in place for a day. That frustrated me because that allowed people who have no regard for the truth to hijack the narrative and to create essentially fake news, false facts about what was and wasn't included in the executive order. So I would have liked to have had a day. I understand that perhaps those trying to infiltrate our nation might have hit the accelerator, but it certainly would have saved us a lot of heartache in the interim.
Congressman Garrett, a lot of people wondering when this Republican Congress and President Trump is going to get serious about looking at curtailing our growth of government and this $20 trillion debt. You've got a majority in there. How do you see that playing out, sir?
Well, right now, we couldn't balance the budget if we wanted to balance the budget. The best hope we had, and I mean literally because of obligated spending, unless we just stopped taking care of either promises we've made or needs that are sort of shrieking for attention, national security, et cetera, we couldn't. So what we're looking for, and I've been told that you get this every single time there's a budget cycle, is a budget that has a pathway to being balanced, so that we can say, okay, in 6 years and 8 years, this thing balances. But the best hope, the last time we had a balance, Democrats like to remind us, was under President Clinton. Well, what happened was we had essentially a second industrial revolution with the explosion of the Internet. Thank goodness Al Gore created it. And so we grew our way to the ability to balance the budget. And so the best hope is that the rollbacks and regulation, that sort of government overreach reform, if you will, and good, strong tax policy, as well as a replacement or provisions that would repeal Obamacare, that these things in concert work to allow for explosive growth. Because as things, and here's the bad news, we know the Fed's going to raise interest rates. Obama got an 8-year vacation with essentially free money for large borrowers, when all conventional wisdom says that you have to raise interest rates so that you have a mechanism to react in the case of global financial crisis.
Right.
Well, the Fed's going to raise rates under Mr. Trump. That's going to be tough. It needs to be done.
Right.
So the only way to get to a balanced budget is to grow our way out of it, I think. In the meantime, he's talking about the penny rule, where we take 1% from every existing federal expenditure. I love it. We've got a hiring freeze on federal employees outside the military. I love it. These are all steps in the right direction. But to understand the scope of current U.S. debt and the deficit is to really wrap your brain around numbers with a whole lot of zeros behind them. And we didn't get there overnight. And unfortunately, whether I'm speaking with Mike Lee or Rand Paul or Mark Meadows or Jim Jordan or whomever, there's no pathway out of it overnight.
So what you're saying is to get this debt under control is going to be a very long game, and it's based on growing our way out of it while not having spending grow.
Well, we need to cut spending where we can. We need to freeze spending where we can't cut spending. But the only way to get our arms around this debt is to grow.
Yeah, you've got to grow your way out of it, right? But in the meantime, you have to hold down spending, because I think everybody realizes the danger of this debt that we're carrying. And let's get back to quantitative easing. This is something that, as you said, we've had for an 8-year period under Obama. We've got interest rates that are artificially pushed down, counter to market, right? Counter to that.
Sure.
A lot of it done, when you're getting a 0.5% interest on a CD, you're putting your money in the stock market. So there's a lot of things going on there now. But as you said, Congressman Garrett, interest rates have to gradually come up to more of a true market level, because we've had this artificial quantitative easing that, as you said, is quite dangerous, right?
Oh, you can't look. I mean, the way we explain it, and I may have done this on the show before, is if you hand a 10-year-old $1,000 and hold up a Snickers bar, ask him how much he'll pay, you might have a $500 Snickers bar. If you hand the same 10-year-old $1 and hold up a Snickers bar, you might have a 10-year-old that doesn't want a candy bar. When you inject lots and lots and lots of money into the economy, inherently, sooner or later, that money purchases less, and it doesn't come home to roost with Bank of America or with General Motors Corporation. It comes home to roost with Mr. and Mrs. Frederick. And so, this policy has been really perpetuated by politicians who are so afraid of getting unelected that they refuse to do the right thing, and that's a glide path to doom. We have to elect women and men who are willing to take the hard right decision over the easy wrong to their potential political detriment, because America is a whole lot more important than any individual or their career path. I mean, this is simple stuff. We're descended from a group of people who pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, and we've devolved into a group who make bad decisions to perpetuate their own political power. Shame on us.
Exactly. Congressman, what is since you've been there a month now, what is the general influence of the Freedom Caucus within your Republican majority in the House?
What we want to do inside the Freedom Caucus is go to House Republican leadership with a small list of items that we would like to see in any sort of plan as it relates to taxes, as it relates to health care, et cetera, and say, if we can find room for these things, ObamaCare and Ferguson repeal, then we want to get behind the plan. I hope that the Freedom Caucus will play a role to move messaging towards a more Adam Smith market-oriented conservative approach, and not a role of putting a match to things, right? I mean, ultimately, the magic trick in Washington is how do you kick in the door without breaking the glass? And so that's sort of the role that we want to play. We want to be a voice for fiscal conservatism, for sound financial policy, but we don't want to be a group who do nothing but throw bombs so that nothing gets done.
Congressman Garrett, is House leadership, I'm just going to ask you straight out, you've been there a month, do they take the Freedom Caucus seriously, or do they just find them to be an annoyance?
No, they take them seriously, because the Freedom Caucus scares the hell out of House leadership. And that's unfortunate, candidly, because I don't doubt the conservative principles of the folks in leadership. But I just think that when you try too hard to please everybody, that you end up pleasing nobody. Mm-hmm. And I think that the Freedom Caucus owes leadership clear, simple, easily defined policy initiatives that would help us get on board and help the team. Not a series of demands, anything like that, but just we want to look as a collective conference, that is, as 241 Republicans, at these ideas. It's sort of just a voice from the right. In the past, and again, it's incumbent upon the Freedom Caucus to lead by providing leadership with these ideas. Mm-hmm. If leadership says we're not interested, well, then we'll decide what we have to do then. But I think they take the Freedom Caucus very seriously. I think in the past what we've seen is the Freedom Caucus being more sort of obstructing Republicans than helping the conservative message, and I think that might be in some part due to a failure on the part of the Freedom Caucus to communicate what's important to it. I think moving forward, it's one part of a multilateral coalition of opinions that collectively make up what we call the Republican Party in Congress.
Congressman, Thanks for being with us, sir. It's always good to
God
have you
bless
on.
and Godspeed, John.